Well, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to our phase one introduction. Tonight, we will be covering choosing the right model, entity choice, and we will also be covering cultivating a cooperative mindset. This is our second session. Actually, it's our first official session. So want to just welcome everybody, and not quite sure what the attendance is going to look like. We were a little behind in our marketing and promotion. So we'll all see what happens, but we are all committed to moving forward and continuing this process because this is some really important work. My name is Galen Logan, Jr. I am the founder and director of Village Connect. And I am happy to be partnering with the East Bay Community Law Center, Repaired Nations, and the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And I believe we have representation tonight on the call from Gregory Jackson. And Greg, if you can identify other folks who are on the call that are with you.
Hey, Galen. So I'm joined here by Charlotte Suey, who's a cooperatives attorney at the Law Center, and she'll be helping to answer some questions if the time allows. And Ricardo Nunez, also from the Law Center, will be doing our presentation for choosing an entity.
Excellent, excellent. Hello, Charlotte. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
And, yep. So moving right ahead, this is what we have in store for tonight. Welcome, which is what this is right now. I think this is what this is called. We're welcoming everybody. Also want to just give you a quick little introduction into what this phase is going to be about. There'll be 3 phases all in all. And then hopefully we can engage everybody that's on the call and kind of get everybody's take on why you chose to come to the call and why you believe that a cooperative is so badly needed today. And then Greg, I believe you or someone else will be talking about how to choose the right model.
Yep, that's correct. Ricardo's getting on the call now. He's going to be helping out to present that.
Okay, great.
I'm here.
And then after that, is that Ricardo?
Yep, I'm here. Can you see me?
Hi, Ricardo. Can see you now. Didn't see you before.
Awesome.
You were hiding back there. All right. And then hopefully we'll open it up and have a little Q&A. And so see if folks have questions. And Ricardo and Charlotte and Greg can sort of respond to some of those questions. And then also we will be having some dialogue around cultivating a cooperative mindset. And so we'll be sharing from Village Connect's perspective, just sort of that process of shifting from a me mindset to a we mindset. And then we'll make a few announcements and we'll close. So, without any further ado, why don't we do just a quick set of introduction. And so I'd like to propose that we do it by way of an I am introduction. And so the way that this works, if you're not familiar, if you haven't been exposed to Village Connect, we ask for more than less. And so the way this works is that we'll ask you to take 10 seconds and state I am and finish the statement until your time is up. And so I will start by modeling, and I will give myself 10 seconds. And I am a father, I am a grandfather, I am a husband, I am a director, I am a lover, I am a poet, and my time is up. And my name is Galen Logan. So you want to finish the I am statement and then close with your name. Close with your name. All right? So why don't we go to you, Greg, next?
Hey, my name is Greg. I am a student. I am a son. I'm a partner. I am enthusiastic most of the
Time.
time.
And you said your name in the beginning, so if you can say it again, close it out.
My name is Greg Jackson.
Excellent. And Wanda, you're up next.
Okay, let me unmute. Okay, great. I am an aunt. I'm an artist. I am a teacher of self-knowledge. I am energy. I'm immortal. I'm powerful. I am infinite intelligence. I am love.
Time. Woo. And what's your name?
And my name is Wanda.
Woo, good Lord. It's smoking. Ricardo, you're up.
Okay, I am beautiful. I am Purepecha. I am from Long Beach. I am what was
Time.
that? Time? And my name is Ricardo.
All right, Ricardo. Good stuff. All right, Gary, you're up.
I am a child of God. I am a father. I am a son. I am a community activist. I am dedicated. I am perseverant. I am committed.
Time.
I am Gary Blodger.
Okay, Gary. Good stuff. Now, Charlotte.
I am a woman. I am a daughter. I am an attorney in progress. I am a cooperator. I am
Time.
and I am Charlotte.
All right, Charlotte. Okay, Tiara. Let me see. Okay, let's try it now. Tiara, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Okay, can hear you now. Go for it.
Wait.
Okay, don't be shy.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Okay, we can hear you.
Okay. I am a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a teacher, I'm a learner, a student, I'm dedicated, I'm loving, caring, I'm beautiful.
Time.
TR.
Wow, you fit a lot in there.
Thank you.
Is there anybody there with you that is on the call also?
Yeah. Kibert.
What's up, Galen?
Hey,
My
you up?
name is Jeff. I'm a father. I'm a leader. I'm a welder. I'm a welding inspector. I'm a newly mechanic. I am on my way. I am busy, and we are
Time. All right, welcome everybody. So I just want to throw out the question, why is cooperative so badly needed today? Anybody? Why more than ever do we need cooperatives?
We need this is Wanda. We definitely need a change in values. Right now, I believe that there is no huge movement that's taking place in communities to change our value system from one that's placed all the value on money and less on service. And I think it's time for us to undo the hierarchical structure or Maslow's structure and put it towards the other end, where everything is equitable with people who are working, so that we can create a society in which we're all equally sharing. We are moving, I think, from a me society to a we society, but we don't have opportunities in front of us that we have seen and have access to information like this cooperative business model that I think can help, especially people in local communities, to change not only the way they are, but also their income as well, and it's supported by a larger group. That's why I see this model as one of the most impactful ones that's going to create positive change in society.
Thank you, Wanda. Again, why is a cooperative enterprise so important? Why now?
I think we can no longer afford to act as if large accomplishments don't involve a large group of people. And it's similar to what Wanda was saying, it's time that we start putting like a different value set first, and begin thinking of how we can create resilient communities that aren't extractive and are inherently regenerative.
Thank you. And it looks like we have somebody that just joined us also. Bojo?
Sir,
Greetings.
good afternoon.
Just
Good
wanted to welcome you on the call.
Thank you, sir.
And right now we're just pondering the question, why is cooperative enterprises so important today? Why now? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think cooperative enterprise has been important for a very long time. I think there's no time like the present, but especially I think the Black community would benefit from a return to these types of economic and social values that were in place before some things went down.
Okay. Thank you. Any other thoughts, folks, before we move on?
Sure. I believe that with the globalization of economics, we're finding that the middle class is falling further and further behind, and that there soon will be perhaps an economic recession, to whereas our communities will be the most drastically impacted. I believe also that the cooperative enterprise is essential. What some of the other speakers have said is because of the social and also collective values that are placed upon working together. And it gives, I think, a sense of relief, not knowing that you're not the only one that is responsible for the entire entity or the entire enterprise. So the collective cooperative is a model which, again, can relieve a lot of social anxiety and also prepare us for economic downfalls that are pending. And it gives us, again, another economic outlook. I'm complete.
Thank you, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move forward, and I want to turn it over to Greg. And Greg, if you can just give us a little background and history on thinking outside the box as we move into discussing how the best way to choose the right model, which Ricardo will share with us.
Okay, so the Think Outside the Box series is a workshop series that was initially developed by Ricardo and a group of SELC attorneys many years ago that we've been presenting for the past few years, giving people an understanding of what needs to happen in order to create an entity for cooperative enterprise. And over the this past year, we've been doing Think Outside the Box workshops in East Oakland, Richmond, and San Leandro, trying to get the word out to African American communities, letting them know that cooperative enterprise is something that's within reach, and giving the tools, or at least the understanding of the tools necessary to start their own businesses. And what Ricardo is going to be teaching next is a portion of a day-long training that we've been doing, as I said, for a number of years, and we'll be having another one November 30th at Village Connect.
Thank you. So without further ado, Ricardo.
Awesome, thanks. I think I'm going to take over screen sharing.
Okay.
Which I think you have to stop sharing your screen, and then I'll be able to share mine. If that works.
I will do that right now.
Okay, awesome. Let's see. Okay, are you all seeing my a short introduction?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, great. So, yeah, my name is Ricardo Nunez. I'm the Director of Economic Democracy at the Sustainable Economies Law Center, and I'm just going to go over the agenda. I have about 30 minutes, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And if you go over, that's fine too. You take a few extra minutes.
Okay, great. And so as we're going through this, feel free to ask a question, just jump in. I want this to be as conversational as possible. So this is what we're going to be going over. I think we just did introductions, so we can skip that. But I want to just hear from folks what they are interested in learning about as we move through this entity formation introduction. We're going to touch on just the kind of review, what is a worker cooperative? Then we're going to talk about the different legal options, and specifically we'll be talking about limited liability companies, corporations, and then if we have time, we'll talk about nonprofits versus for-profits. Yeah. So, oh, and just before we get started, just a disclaimer, I am not an attorney, so I am a legal apprentice. In California, you can still become an attorney without going to law school through a law office study program where you have a supervising attorney that you study under. And so, for example, me providing this training is part of the hours towards my legal apprenticeship that I report to the bar to let them know that I'm studying and learning the law. So thanks for allowing me to jump on this call. And after 4 years, I become eligible to take the bar, and if I pass, I get my license to become an attorney. So yeah, before I get started, I'm curious what people want to talk about, what I should lean into during this conversation. So what do folks have questions about when it comes to entity formation or forming your business structure before I get started?
Well, from a cooperative perspective, could you go over the LLCs and how each individual is not particularly liable, but also how it limits and structures certain portions or individuals of the co-op, identifies them as being the LLC funder or finder, if I'm stating that correctly.
Yeah, awesome, thanks.
And I also would like to pose the distinction between if I got together with 10 of my friends and we pooled our money and you know, went out and bought a piece of property, does that make us a cooperative, or is there a specific distinction that we have to take on?
Anybody else? Any other things you want to make sure that you have like questions just for me to lean into a little bit?
Perhaps the breakdown of profits.
Ooh, okay. Might not get into that, but I can pull that out of my hat if we have time.
That's quite all right.
I think part of the process, Ricardo, is going over the advantages and disadvantages of forming a co-op business structure. And I'm sure that it can also depend on the industry that one decides to take on. But generally speaking, I'm sure that there are some disadvantages of forming a co-op as well.
Okay, those are great questions. Thanks for that. So before I get into entities, I want to just quickly review some cooperative foundations. So I think when I first got into this work, the idea that I had about cooperatives was that it was primarily used by white hippies who were trying to exit the economy and use their affluence and resources to just do their hippie life. When in fact that invisibilized all of the history that people of color brought to cooperative economics. And there's actually a pretty amazing book that Gregory Jackson held some book clubs on called Collective Courage, which details the history of African American cooperative economic thought and practice. And there's actually a graphic novel version of this book coming out next year. So I'm really excited about that to make it more accessible to folks. But what is a cooperative? There's an international definition of cooperative, which is an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. So that's the international definition from the International Cooperative Alliance, which is an organization of cooperative organizations all over the world. But for me, I like to think about a cooperative as member-owned, member-controlled, and member-benefiting. That these are institutions and structures that are owned by their members, that are democratically controlled, and that benefit and meet some need of the members of that cooperative. So what do I mean by member-owned? Co-op is jointly owned by its members, so it's owned and governed, as opposed to in a traditional business where business is owned and governed by one or a few individuals or shareholders whose main interest is generating a profit. So in a joint ownership cooperative, there's more likelihood and there has been more likelihood in paying fair wages, providing sustainable livelihoods, investing in the local communities, and promoting a healthy environment. What do I mean by member controlled? Co-ops are run by the democratic principle of one member, one vote. This is one of the core foundational principles of a cooperative. So to respond to one of the questions, just a group of people coming together, putting their money together and buying something might not be a cooperative just yet. But if they decided to make their decisions democratically and that the amount of money that they put into the venture or the enterprise, that didn't dictate how much control that they had or influence in the cooperative. What we're trying to do is decouple this idea. Money equals power and influence and control. And so one where we recognize that we are all people and we have things to contribute, and that just because you were born into this world or maybe come from a background with more money, that doesn't mean you should automatically get more money from doing less. So, and a cooperative is member benefiting. So in a cooperative, all the money that's left over, so maybe quickly to respond to how profits are distributed, is that instead of in a typical business, how much money you've invested means that you're going to get a return based off of how much you've invested. In a cooperative, it's how much value you added. And in a worker cooperative, for example, a lot of times that's just defined by how many hours did you work over a given time, about a year usually, based like in proportion to the other workers of the cooperative. So if I was working 30 hours or 30% of the hours over the year, then I would get 30% of the profits. And so it's also starting to decouple that idea that just because you have more money at the beginning, you should get more money at the end. So cooperatives are these institutions that are building equity in real time through their functions. Because what are the conventional business principles? The only principle that typical businesses have is to maximize shareholder return. And it's not only theorists like Milton Friedman, who was consulting and talking with prime ministers and presidents. We actually have it in law. So in the legal, in law, there's this idea that corporations are, their sole responsibility is to maximize profit to shareholders. And if they don't do that, the shareholders and stockholders can actually sue the board of directors for not giving them enough profit. And so this is something that's institutionalized. It's part of the structure, our legal structure in our society. And this is basically what conventional businesses operate under. And so cooperatives give us a different model to operate under, and we've enshrined cooperative principles into the law, which I'll get into in a minute.
Question.
Yes, please.
Yes, you indicated that if an individual works 30% or 30 hours and contributes less funding than, say, another individual,
Mm-hmm.
he can make equal to, if not more than, the individual who contributed more money?
Correct. Yeah. So if let's say you had $10,000 to invest in the business, and I only had $1,000 to invest in the business, we would put the money into the business, and then as we're operating the business, let's say you only work 10% of the hours and I work 30%. At the end of the year, I'm going to get 30% of the profits and you'll get 10% of the profits. Now, when you exit the company, you'll get that investment back. If you'll get that $10,000 investment back, or however you want to structure it in your, if it's an LLC, your operating agreement, or your corporation into your bylaws, how you want to repay that. You could also, there's different ways for you to structure it, but just because you invest more money doesn't mean you get more money every year. The function of a cooperative enterprise is to reward the value that you're adding to the cooperative.
So that would be something that would have to be written into the bylaws and also into the cooperative agreement prior to beginning business?
Yeah, you'd want to decide those things at the beginning because, you'd want to decide if somebody puts in more money, how do you want to deal with that? How are they going to get that money back? Is it going to be like a loan to the co-op? What is that going to look like?
Gotcha. Thank you.
No, that's a great question though. Let's see. So so cooperatives, depending on who you talk to, different people are going to define cooperatives in different ways. I know I gave sort of my definition of member-owned, member-controlled, and member-benefiting. But there's these 7 cooperative principles that were defined during the Industrial Revolution in England by these artisans, the Rochdale pioneers. And what was happening with them is that they were artisans. Their professions were being automated by machines, not unlike today. And so they came together to start a grocery store and set out some principles to operate their grocery store under that eventually became the internationally recognized 7 cooperative principles. So whether you're a housing cooperative, a consumer cooperative, a worker cooperative, agricultural cooperative, these 7 principles are the principles that bind all of those different types of enterprises together. So voluntary and open membership, so non-discrimination to folks who can participate. Democratic member control, which I went over. Member economic participation, that typically means buying a share into the cooperative or buying from the cooperative, or providing your labor to the cooperative. Autonomy and independence, so that the cooperative isn't owned and controlled or directed by an outside organization. It's owned and controlled by and led by the members themselves. Education, training, and information. Cooperatives understand that we live within a capitalist system, one that is extractive and that's exploitative and marginalizing, not only to ourselves, but to each other and our communities. And so cooperatives put this principle in to make sure that we are training, ongoing training inside the business of the members, because there's a lot of things we have to unlearn when we're operating democratically. And it's not only internally, it's also externally, educating the community, the public, about why cooperatives are needed and why they should support them. Cooperation among cooperatives. Another thing that's been proven time and time again is that individual cooperative businesses, in isolation, they can't be islands within the sea of capitalism. We need to build these ecosystems of cooperatives. And luckily in the Bay Area, we have a pretty robust ecosystem. And then the last is concern for community. So making sure that even though it's member controlled and member benefiting, that we're also taking into account the impact that our cooperatives are having on the community. And just to bring to light, I think a lot of people are misled or misinformed because they hear cooperative and they think it's some small or niche thing. In fact, there's over 30,000 cooperatives that operate at 73,000 places of business throughout the U.S. So agricultural cooperatives, consumer cooperatives like REI, housing cooperatives like the student housing cooperatives in Berkeley. For all cooperatives across the United States, they have nearly $654 billion in revenue, more than $3 trillion in assets, and have over 2 million jobs and $75 billion in wages every year. So cooperatives actually have a significant footprint in our American economy, but people just don't know it. So part of our work is to make sure that people understand that there's this hidden cooperative economy. So like if you're a member of a credit union, you're a member of a cooperative and you can vote for the board of directors to help influence the direction of your credit union. And I just wanted to bring up a few different examples of cooperatives really quick. So we have some local ones like Mandela Grocery Cooperative. The folks at the top left are there. They're based in West Oakland. The folks at the top right are Design Action Collective based in downtown Oakland. It was one of the an early place in the tech industry where people of color, trans and queer people felt safe and were able to create a livelihood for themselves. The largest cooperative in the United States is in the bottom left, Cooperative Home Care Associates, where they have over 2,000 workers and over 1,600 of them are worker owners. They're based in the Bronx. And New Era Windows Cooperative is a cooperative in right outside of Chicago, which is a truly like inspirational story of the first workers' occupation since the 1940s, I believe. And the workers occupied the factory after the business owner decided to shut it down without telling anybody, without giving people their pay, back wages. And they occupied the factory and eventually bought the assets of the factory and turned it into a worker co-op. I'm just going to do a quick plug for the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. So you are not alone in this. After tonight's call, I know Greg and Village Connect, they're going to be doing some more training and education, but there's a national landscape of resources out there who want to support you in your cooperative enterprise. One of them is the National Business Association of Worker Cooperatives, the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. They provide training and education. They convene worker owners from different industries to talk about the barriers that they're facing. And they also do policy advocacy and a few other things. To give you a sense of worker cooperatives nationally, this information is a little outdated because now we estimate that there's almost 500 worker cooperatives in democratic workplaces. And another change in these numbers is that a typical worker cooperative actually in the latest study has shown that workers make about $19 per hour. So we're pretty high above the minimum wage. Yeah, I'll just keep going. I'm going to skip over a couple of these. So why aren't, if cooperatives are such an amazing resource and enterprise, why aren't there more of them? Well, one is that people just don't know that they exist. They're not taught in business schools or entrepreneurship programs. And people don't know what a cooperative is and isn't. And then also, they don't teach about cooperatives in law school, so there's not a lot of attorneys nor accountants that have competency in serving cooperatives, or business consultants and professionals. So we're trying to change that. Okay, so getting into the meat of what we're here to talk about tonight, legal entities. We're going to talk about what are legal entities and why do we form them. What is a limited liability? What does that mean? And what are some common types of legal entities? So, slide, I think that's the manual that goes into some narrative, some deeper discussion around all these things. So feel free to just like sit with it and be in conversation with me as I'm moving through this content. And I know I'm like talking real fast, so feel free to cut me off, like just jump in if you have a question. So when we're working with clients, as we have for now a decade, providing support to cooperatives of different types and served over 1,300 of them, the most common that we see are the most common legal entity we see them formed as are legal limited liability companies, general stock corporations, and cooperative corporations. So we're not going to be talking about in this section about the nonprofit mutual benefit corporation or the California Benefit Corporation, flexible purpose, or B Corps, none of that. So I'm just going to focus on limited liability companies, general stock corporations. So what is a legal entity? Does anybody have an idea of what a legal entity is? Just want to throw out an idea. What they think it means?
A corporation is a legal entity, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Corporation is a legal entity.
Like because it has rights and the ability to sue and like tax status and like almost like legal sentience, like a human being almost.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, legal entity is the legal structure and rules under which a business operates. And like you said, corporations themselves are considered human beings, a legal human in the eyes of the law. So like you said, they can sue, they can be sued, they can enter contracts, etc. So should you form a legal entity? Why do people think we should form a legal entity?
Again, to limit the liability of the corporation should it go under, and shield the investors from total loss.
Nice. Any other reasons you would form a legal entity?
Yeah, aren't there certain advantages that you would have that you wouldn't have if you didn't?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, the biggest one that we see people why they form a legal entity is for liability reasons. So think about the types of activities your business is going to be doing. Is it going to be serving food? Are customers going to be walking into your property? Will you be carrying out work on somebody else's property, like a landscaping company? Will you have employees? All those things are considerations, and you don't want to be personally sued for any of those types of, if something goes wrong in any of those situations. You want to be able to put a protective shield between yourself and your company. Another reason that people form a legal entity is for tax treatment, so beneficial tax treatment of your business, and also mission and formation. So a legal entity allows you to take this idea, this vision that you have, and then put it into a legal form so that it can outlive your existence at the organization. So things you want to consider when you're trying to decide whether or not you should form a legal entity is liability, tax considerations, and the cost of formation. So when you form a legal entity, it's going to cost some money to put in the forms. So sometimes when people come in, if they're just at that idea phase of their business, and they're just going to be doing just a little bit like test piloting their product, or doing something that's bringing in a very little amount of money during their first year of operation, sometimes we advise folks not to form a legal entity. It's maybe more appropriate to just get some liability insurance, get a DBA or doing business as license from the city that you're operating in, and that's about it. And there's some other things to help protect yourself. But sometimes when you're just starting this business, it's not always the right thing to do to form a legal entity. Once you start generating some revenue, you start doing this as your day-to-day, makes a lot more sense to form a legal entity. So if you are starting a business, or if you start operating as a business, but you don't file any paperwork and you just like start selling your cookies, or you start doing landscaping, what ends up happening is that the government sees that you're a business and they treat you as such. And so what we call this is, if you're doing it by yourself, a sole proprietorship. And if you're doing it with a group of folks, we call it a partnership. So whether or not you've actually formed any entity, filled out any paperwork, if you've done any paperwork with the city or the state, if you haven't done any of that, but you actually start operating and acting like a business, the government views you as a business. And so here's some situations that can arise if you just start operating as a business without filing any paperwork or getting any insurance. One, liability. It's unlimited. They can sue you and your business. So if you have a car or a house or anything like that, they can come after all of your personal assets if you don't have a liability shield between yourself and your business. And in fact, this is what we call joint and several liability. So if you're doing a business with your friend and you have nothing to do with this particular day during the business, and your friend who you're starting this business with goes out and hurts somebody, that person can not only sue your friend, they can sue you and everything you have. So when you just start operating a business, you have unlimited liability. A benefit for not forming a legal entity when you start is that when you do form a legal entity, you have to pay the California state $800 minimum franchise tax fee. It's just basically California says, if you want to do business in our state, you got to pay us $800 for the opportunity to do business here, and you're taxed as a partnership. And then also, when you don't form a legal entity, you avoid all the organizational formalities. So we're going to get into some of the formalities that you have to do when you form a corporation. But if you don't form a legal entity, you can just avoid doing having to take minutes and doing all these other types of filings and things. So that's the default if you just started doing business before forming any type of entity. So how do you protect yourself? You get a liability shield. So a corporate shield basically puts a legal barrier between your business and your assets. That way you won't have to worry about losing your personal belongings if somebody sues your business. So just to reiterate, some pros of entity formation: do you limit liability? There's also the pro of credibility. When you're trying to get loans from banks, from investors, from others, a lot of people, they like to see some type of incorporation. It makes them feel like you're taking this seriously, that you're trying to do this legitimately. So having a legal entity provides a lot of credibility. And so attract investors. You can also, whether or not you're a limited liability company or a corporation, you can decide what tax category you want to elect to be. So that can be a benefit. Some cons for forming a legal entity: that you have the potentially additional taxes to pay that $800 minimum franchise tax. If you form as a corporation, you have corporate formalities. And it does take time and it costs money to form your business. You got to file some paperwork. You got to go through some legal hoops. So those are some cons. Before I move into like LLCs and things, any questions on just the general like pros and cons of forming a legal entity?
Yeah, you said that it can limit your liability. If there was a claim brought against your co-op and it exceeded, what your liabilities are, you're saying that the liability can be cut or limited to a certain level?
Yeah.
And so if it exceeded what the cost value was, I don't know if I'm asking the question.
No,
but yeah.
Yeah. So if you're, let's just say you're running this company and you have $10,000 worth of assets. So whether it's like materials and your bank account and all those things total $10,000, somebody got hurt from a business activity, and they come after to sue you, they can only get that $10,000. That, you know, they can only get that. And that's the benefit of having that limited liability, is that they can't come after your personal assets. Now I just want to put a little asterisk on this, because there are corporate formalities, and it's important to maintain those corporate formalities, which we'll get into, like meeting minutes and board elections and those types of things. Because if you create a legal entity and somebody comes after and sues you, what they can do is, it's called piercing the corporate veil. They can say, these people just formed this shell corporation. They actually don't have meetings. They don't have a functional board. They don't take minutes. So really this thing is just a shell company. So we should be able to go after their personal assets as well. And so if they can prove to the court that you haven't actually been complying with the law of corporate law, then they can come after your personal assets. But as long as you're maintaining those corporate formalities, typically they can't come after your personal assets.
And the formalities will be structured by the state or the federal government?
It's the state.
The state that you work, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, every state in the country has their own entity laws. So legal entities in California are different from ones in New York. New York is different from Texas. They all kind of usually follow similar patterns, but it's the states that control the entities. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So cooperatives as a legal structure. Here's one of the first pages of a cooperative operating agreement that we created at the Law Center. And at the Law Center, we like to use cartoons in our operating agreements and our bylaws, because we find that incorporating images and pictures actually makes the documents, the governing documents of your cooperative, more accessible to the members. And what we need to do is make sure that in a cooperative, if power is going to be effectively distributed, if decision-making is going to be, if people are going to need to exercise their power, they're going to need to understand these documents. So we need to make them as accessible as possible. And so we have sample operating agreements for limited liability companies and sample bylaws for corporations on our website, which you can download for free. But cooperatives as legal structures. So a lot of folks who come to us, they want to start a business, a cooperative business, but a lot of times they want to avoid, say, being considered an employee. And so, like was mentioned earlier, corporations are seen as legal humans in the eyes of the law, and so that legal corporation is actually the employer of everybody who works there. And so typically a court will say, if you're working for a corporation, you're considered an employee. But a lot of companies getting started, they can't pay the minimum wage, can't pay the overtime, and provide meal breaks for these people who are coming together to start these cooperatives. So a lot of times they'll start them as limited liability companies. So LLCs, limited liability companies, are very flexible. You can basically structure the company any way you want. And so what we can do is incorporate these cooperative principles into the business entity and write out the agreement called the operating agreement, which is basically the contract between all the different partners in the limited liability company on how they want to make decisions, how they want to distribute profits, etc. So it's very flexible. It creates that limited liability. So it puts that liability shield between your personal assets and the businesses. An LLC is governed by the operating agreement. Because it's so flexible, there's very low levels of corporate formality. So you don't need to have a board of directors. You don't need to, have certain numbers of meetings or make members aware of meetings so much time before the meeting is going to happen, those types of things. So there's low levels of corporate formalities. one thing about LLCs is that it's real easy to change the structure. So one of the downsides of LLCs is that future members of your cooperative can come in and decide, you know what, we don't want this to be a cooperative anymore. And it's pretty easy to change the operating agreement so that the company basically functions like a typical business. Yeah, and like I said earlier, one of the biggest reasons that we see people do this, form an LLC, is that members are considered partners and not employees in an LLC. Another thing that you need to know about LLCs when you're forming them is that it's pass-through taxation. So whether you have losses at the end of the year or you have profits at the end of the year, all of those have to flow to some member of the cooperative, of the LLC. Or so sometimes that can be difficult because some people want more, some people want more write-offs or they don't want as many taxes at the end of the year. So that can be difficult. As well as it's hard to really retain and save up money in an LLC, because even if you don't get the money as profit at the end of the year, you're still going to get taxed on it, even if you want to keep it in the cooperative to use next year as operating capital. Yeah, it can be difficult to save. Let's see. So just to reiterate, one of the biggest reasons that people choose the LLC is it creates a limited liability shield between yourself and your personal assets.
Ricardo, question.
Yes, please.
Are you familiar with how Mandela and some of the other ones that you have put on the screen, how they function? Are they LLCs, and are you familiar with the way that they structure the pass-through and that type of thing?
So Mandela, I believe, is a cooperative corporation. Yeah, so they're not an LLC, they're a corporation. What was it? And as far as typically what I see as far as distributing taxes, like profits or losses to everyone, what I've seen typically is that it's just equally distributed to all the members. That's sort of the easiest way that I've seen it done, is that any profits, everybody's going to sort of, you're going to get profits based off of the value that you've contributed or how much time that you worked. So if I get 30% of the profits, then I'm going to have to pay taxes on that 30% at the end of the year. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Let's see. Another thing that we see a lot in LLCs is that if you're working with folks who have, let's see, let me just take a step back. In the United States, it is illegal to knowingly hire undocumented workers. But in the United States, it is totally fine for a foreign national to own a piece of a company. And so folks from undocumented backgrounds can become partners in an LLC and own a piece of that company and not have to disclose whether they don't have to disclose their documentation status. So a lot of folks from our immigrant communities use LLC cooperatives as a way to help protect themselves from disclosing their documentation status, or maybe even it's not them, but their family that they're worried about. So that's another thing that we see in LLCs, how they're being used. So, but something to note, whether or not you have mixed documentation status folks in your cooperative, if you're trying to avoid being considered an employee, there's a few different things that you need to make sure that you do in your cooperative so that you can avoid employment laws for yourself as you're getting your business off the ground. So one is every member is an owner. So when you're filling out the paperwork to file your LLC paperwork at the state, there's a little box that says, is this a member managed LLC or a manager managed LLC? And you want to check member managed, which means that every member, every partner of the LLC is going to be an owner and managing the cooperative. And sorry, I'm using cooperative in the general sense, not just to cooperative corporations, but cooperatives in the principled sense. Another thing that you want to make sure to avoid employment status is to create as little hierarchy as possible, and to make sure that members, all the members, actually have real decision-making power over hiring, firing, strategy, and other major decisions. You want to avoid direct supervision and maybe have rotating peer evaluations, peer support. There's different ways that we've structured it. Another thing is to make sure that members share in the profits and losses. Another thing is to avoid growing very large. A lot of times we see LLCs kind of reach about 15 to 30 members. And that's about as large as that we've seen people get before getting really uncomfortable about employment status. Because after a certain point, how much decision making do you actually have with all the decisions in the business? It's safer to form as an LLC to avoid employee tax status. A member managed LLC. Went over those two. So here's just a graphic of kind of what I just mentioned. That a member managed LLC or an LLC is the agreement is called an operating agreement. Each member is taxed on the share of entity profits like a partnership. So you're going to get a K-1 instead of a W-2. Another benefit for an LLC is workers' compensation insurance is not required for members. So if you're doing something in an industry where workers' compensation is a lot of money, and we've seen in home care and landscaping, in these service sector industries, workers' compensation would be a lot of money. For some local cooperatives in the Bay Area, we've heard of companies paying up to $250,000 per year on workers' compensation that most of the time they never access or use. So an LLC can be a way to avoid that. LLCs are very flexible, and it can be really just, you can structure it very simply and incorporate the cooperative practices and management of all members. So like I said, one member, one vote, profits are shared on the basis of work and equal participation.
So with regards to an individual being undocumented, how would that be reflected when they go taxation, say? And then how would that impact the entire LLC or the entire cooperative, other members, if there is a taxation issue?
So, so typically what I see with undocumented folks is instead of having a social security number, they have an ITIN or an individual tax identification number, and that's what they'll use for their tax purposes. So the ITIN. Yeah.
I see.
And as long as the other cooperative members are not knowingly hiring this person, if they don't knowingly hire an undocumented person, then they should be fine. So.
But they would have to knowingly be aware of the ITIN, correct? And knowingly be aware of the tax liabilities, so to speak, as they pertain to the entire entity.
Yeah, ITINs are not only used by undocumented folks, they're used by all different types of entities and individuals for various reasons. So just because somebody has an ITIN doesn't mean that they're undocumented.
Doesn't mean they're undocumented.
Yeah,
correct.
yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So an example of an LLC cooperative is Home Green Home. They're a worker cooperative in San Francisco. I believe actually they have about 15 worker owners right now. They all participate in management, and they actually have considerably higher wages than industry average. So that's just an example, a local example of an LLC worker cooperative. So that's LLC. I'm gonna move into general stock corporations, or move into corporations. Here's our stock boards of wood. This is a very common, most commonly used corporation. A lot of people, when they talk about C corporations, C corporation is actually a tax status, but typically it's used for a general stock corporation. General stock corporations are owned by shareholders. They're profit-driven. Shares of stock usually exchange. It's that how much you've invested means how much power and return on investment you get. Voting power is directly related to the number of shares owned. Another thing about corporations that's different than LLCs is that you get this double taxation. So when money flows into the cooperative, into a corporation, the corporation as a legal person has to pay taxes. And then when that money is distributed to the individual shareholders, the shareholders have to pay income tax on it. So it's that double taxation. Now, a lot of what we've seen in the past is that even though it has all of these characteristics, that's it's profit driven, shares of stock are usually in exchange for capital contributions. What we've seen is that folks will take this general stock corporation and incorporate the cooperative principles into it to meet their needs. So we'll get into, there's actually a cooperative corporation that more and more people are using, but this is one that a lot of previous cooperatives used. So here's your basic corporate structure. You have the corporation, and it has all the shareholders. And so typically in a worker cooperative, the members or the workers are those shareholders. And so one of the things about being in a corporation, you're presumed to be an employee under employment law. So you can't get around those, not paying overtime, not paying for meal breaks, etc., complying with employment law. You're going to get W-2s, which some people actually like because they're a little bit easier than K-1s. LLCs, you pay quarterly taxes, and so doing that on a regular basis can be a little just more work that people don't want to have to do. So sometimes people like to get those W-2s and just pay once. Workers' compensation is usually almost always required for a corporation, and there's more corporate formalities, which I'll get into. So the one that we really like is the Cooperative Corporation, which is in the California Corporations Code. So Cooperative Corporation incorporates cooperative principles of one member, one vote, and distribution of surplus. So this is where there's some terminology, it gets a little weird, but in a cooperative, instead of calling that excess money at the end of the year profits, we call it surplus. So any money that's created by members that there's leftover like net income at the end of the year, we call that surplus as opposed to profits. And that's because there's a special tax category at the IRS that allows for beneficial tax status for cooperatives on any surplus that's created. So I can get into that in a minute. Another thing about cooperative corporations in California is that if you want to have the word cooperative in your name, you have to form as a cooperative corporation. No other legal entity in California can use cooperative in its business name except for cooperative corporations. So if it's really important for you to have cooperative in your business name, then you need to form under a cooperative corporation, California Cooperative Corporation. Now, a few years ago, the Law Center with a host of other organizations came together to pass the California Cooperative Corporation Act, which we increased the amount of money that members could contribute to become members to buy in their share to the cooperative. So before it was 300, it went up to, and we got it up to 1,000. We reduced some meeting notice requirements for collective board worker cooperatives. Collective board worker cooperatives are where cooperative corporation, all of the members are on the board as opposed to a small subset of people that are elected to be representing all of the members on the board. And we define what a worker cooperative is. So we actually have cooperative corporation, and then you can elect to be a worker cooperative corporation in California. And one of the other really beneficial things about being a worker cooperative corporation is that you can actually get anybody in California to invest in your into your worker cooperative up to $1,000 without having to file any paperwork. We don't have time tonight, but I think in a future session, Gregory or someone is going to be going over securities law and how why it's so difficult for businesses to get investors and to raise capital, and how cooperatives provide some exemptions to some of those securities laws that allow for you to be able to capitalize your business in a little bit easier of a way.
Ricardo, you said that everybody is a board member?
For a collective board, so there's collective boards and the representative boards. So, sorry, one of the other corporate formalities for a cooperative corporation is that cooperative corporations, and really every corporation, whether you're a nonprofit, general stock corporation, cooperative corporation, you always have to have a board of directors. And so a collective board is where all of the members of a cooperative, let's say there's 15 worker members of a cooperative, a collective board would mean that they all elect themselves every year to all be on the board of directors. So they have a board member hat that they wear to make board decisions. Then they have their like management hat, depending on where in the business they are sort of doing management types of work. And then they have their worker hat of all their day-to-day activities that they're doing. So we're all wearing different hats in these cooperatives as we're moving through the different decisions and the different operations that make the business run.
Now, is there a hierarchy on the board, like board chair, board president?
Mm-hmm. So every board of directors has to have a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. And we encourage for folks to also have a vice president in case the president can't fulfill their duties, and to have a vice treasurer in case the treasurer is unable to fulfill their duties, especially when it comes to like loan documents or something. We've seen cooperatives where a loan document comes up and it needs to be signed by the treasurer of the cooperative, and that treasurer is out of town. And so we have to wait until they get back for them to sign the loan document. But if there's a vice treasurer, then that person can take up the duties if the treasurer is not available. But these positions, they don't need to be given any more power than anybody else on the board of directors. They can be sort of figureheads. So they wouldn't be ones who would necessarily have more power to say, okay, when it comes to these decisions, it's always the president who's going to make that decision. Instead, you can say, for these types of decisions, the entire board has to come to consensus, and it's the president that's the one who's going to sign the documents. They're basically going to fulfill the decision of the rest of the board. So there's a lot of flexibility with how much power you give to those folks. But basically, the state of California just wants to know that somebody's going to sign certain documents, and somebody's going to be taking notes at the meetings.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. So yeah, every member has one vote in a cooperative. So money doesn't equal power, people equal power. What we've seen in worker cooperatives is there's lots of statistics and studies to back this up. It's actually a lot higher job satisfaction and worker health and happiness in worker cooperatives. There's higher incomes in cooperatives than in the industries, other businesses in the same industry. They have longer sustainability and involvement in the local community. So we see cooperatives take up solar and renewable energies sooner than other businesses, provide more benefits to the communities, et cetera. And there's actually more resiliency in economic downturns. So when a cooperative is going through a downturn in their business, instead of firing folks, and then when the business picks up again, having to hire and train and get those people on board, which takes a lot of time and energy, what we see cooperatives do is they'll all sort of take some pay cuts across the board to get them through those lean times, so that when they come back, they can have all the expertise, that business knowledge, those skills to just hit the ground running when the business starts picking back up again.
So how would investors work if there were a downtime and someone wanted to invest in cooperative? Would that be permissible, and how would that impact the membership?
So it depends on the type of investment. There's equity. So in a worker cooperative corporation, you can have those community investors invest up to $1,000. We've actually written into the statute, the corporate statute, that those outside investors only have certain decision-making powers. And so they can only decide on if the cooperative wants to close, cooperative wants to buy another business, wants to buy real estate, or if the cooperative wants to make a decision to what's called demutualizing, which means basically becoming a non-cooperative, becoming a capitalist business. And outside of those four issues, those outside investors don't have any say in the operations of the business itself. We wanted to make sure that it's actually controlled and governed by the worker members when we wrote the statute. But during lean times, it depends on the type of investment. So if it's equity, then if it's a lean time, those equity investors, they're not going to get in any money if the worker owners are not going to get money. If it's debt, you can structure the debt repayment based off of, if we're not profitable in a certain year, you're only going to get a certain amount of your debt repayment, and then we'll pick it back up. But what I see is typically cooperatives, like any other business, they'll have what's called a capital stack, and so you have capital on top that you have to pay out first, and then sort of this like stack of like pancakes. So the top is going to get eaten first, and then if you have money left over, the next pancake will be taken, and then so on. And usually the worker owners are the last ones to see that return from the surplus of their efforts, if they have all this outside folks that they have to repay. So there's a lot of different ways you can structure it, and there's a lot of different ways that you can work with attorneys and folks to really write the rules that you want on how you're going to repay folks, whether it's a good year or bad year. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. So I've been talking a lot about governance and management and saying these things, so I'm just going to quickly go over what I mean by that. So when I say governance, what do folks hear when I say that? What does that mean to you?
Go ahead.
I was going to say oversight.
Oversight? Mm-hmm.
Administrative structures.
Administrative structures. Yep. Yeah, so it's setting the mission and vision. The governing bodies typically set the mission and vision of the business or the organization. They decide on the strategy. How is this business going to best be able to reach its goals? They define the management structures. How will the day-to-day work happen? What's accountability look like? So the oversight role that you were talking about. Governance is also where you can set policies, whether it's board management, operations, decisions, etc. And also to define the decision-making structures, which in a cooperative is really important to do beforehand, and then also allow the ability to evolve the decision-making structures over time. In a typical business, we know what the decision-making structures are. The boss tells you what to do, and then you do it. In a cooperative, since everybody's has equal voice, you have to put some time and thought into how you're going to make these decision-making structures, so not every time you need to make a decision, it takes a 3-hour meeting. So we have a lot of models to share with you all about that. Then also governance, they're like that oversight role, evaluating the business against its goals. So like I said earlier, we see sort of two ends of a spectrum for cooperative corporations and their relationship to this governance or the board. So on one side, we have a representative board. So in Alvarado Street Bakery, which is up in Petaluma, there's about 160 worker owners there. The 160 worker owners elect, and I think it's a 9-person board, and that 9-person board is the one that's doing all of those, governance types of activities. And then, like I mentioned, there's the collective board, where every member is on the board, and that's what you see at the Arizmendi bakeries on Lakeshore, and on San Pablo and Emeryville, in San Francisco, San Rafael, and so all the members, all the worker owners are on the board of directors in a collective board. And then you can go that whole gamut in between of having larger boards or smaller, but that's sort of the two two ends of the spectrum that we see.
And while you have that visual up,
Oh yeah,
Ricardo, again, you alluded to it earlier, but can you just again, since we see both, what are the pros and cons of each?
Sure, yeah. So in a representative board, a pro is that you don't have every member having to participate in all these governance decisions and meetings. So in a large cooperative like Alvarado Street, where there's 160 worker owners, imagine having a every other month board meeting of 160 members, and everybody has to show up, and how long does that meeting take to decide those things? So, so a benefit for a larger company is that. But even on a smaller side, if you are a 15-member worker cooperative, and there's honestly just like 5 or 6 people who are really interested in all of these governance decisions, and the other folks don't really care, and they're fine delegating that power and authority to a smaller board, then allows those other people to kind of go and do the work that they want to do, while that smaller group of people can focus on strategy, long-term vision, those types of things. Mm-hmm. For a collective board, a benefit of a collective board is that everybody, you're building this ownership culture on a more regular basis. You're like flexing those decision-making muscles. So even those people who don't really care about some of those like governance decisions, they still have to, they're sort of forced to participate in it. So they understand the value if they're not at the beginning really interested in some of those conversations. I know at our organization at the Law Center, we're democratically run. And so, and we have meetings regularly where it's all staff making these decisions. And I know, and I've listened to my coworkers talk about, I don't need to necessarily be at that meeting, but even those people who are saying, I don't need to be there, sometimes have the deepest wisdom and the most reflective insights when we're trying to make a decision. So a lot of times collective boards can really bring the collective wisdom of our communities out in a fuller way than delegating that responsibility to a smaller group of people. So.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, yeah, and to the question earlier, I kind of went over this, but every corporation has to have officers, but they don't necessarily have to have more power than anybody else on the board. So you always have to have a secretary, you have to have a president, you have to have a treasurer in a California Cooperative Corporation. And like I said, it's just the state wants to know that somebody is doing those things. Somebody's going to be signing those documents, signing those papers. They're going to be the ones who are signing official contracts for the cooperative. Now, one thing to know about officers is that even though there are 3 officer positions on a board of directors, you can actually have one person filling two positions. So if you want somebody to be both the secretary and treasurer and one person hold that position, you can have one person holding secretary and treasurer position and one person being the president. So it's interesting the flexibility that the state gives us, but you can actually have one person sort of, especially if it's a figurehead role, just one person sort of filling multiple officer duties on the board. So
wasn't there a model earlier where you mentioned that there was the possibility of rotating positions where no one individual would maintain a position for the entirety of the year, so to speak, or they would rotate?
Yeah,
was that mentioned earlier?
Yeah, definitely. So another thing when you're deciding on your decision-making structures is just you can set term limits. So, and typically actually a board of directors, one of the core components of a cooperative corporation is that the members vote on the board of directors, and then the board of directors votes on the secretary, president, and treasurer at least once a year. So that's the minimum sort of time frame that you have this position, but you can have it if you want to do it every 6 months or something like this, but you at least have to have it once a year, that vote for the board of directors, and then the voting from the board to select who the secretary, president, and treasurer are. So yeah.
Thank you.
So we talked about governance, so just wanted to review management. So management is implementing all those decisions that the governing body set out. So it's marketing, accounting, human resources, customer service. So just wanted to bring that up because I think a lot of times people get management and governance confused. And so just wanted to do that. So that was like a real fast and dirty intro into legal entities. So I just wanted to review what are legal entities and why do we form them? So can somebody tell me what are legal entities and why we form them?
We formed it for liability and the structuring of the organization.
That's right. And what is limited liability? Somebody answer that.
Protects your personal assets against the liabilities of the corporate loss.
Boom. Yes. And then what are the most common forms of legal entity that we see used by cooperatives?
GSC.
GSC?
General Stock Corporation.
Yep, that's one. General Stock Corporation. Which one? What other ones? LLC?
Oh, and Cooperative Corporation.
Boom. Yep, Cooperative Corporation.
All right. All right.
So yeah, so that's the intro into entity formation for cooperatives. We have, yeah, like I said, we have all these resources online. We have a website called cooplaw.org, which you can visit, and it has all more in-depth content that is actually in plain English. So don't worry, it's not all written in legalese. Yeah.
Is there any others? Or just primarily the three that are most common and most used?
Yeah, the California Cooperative Corporation, limited liability companies, and partnerships when you don't form any entity. Those are the typical things that we see in the General Stock Corporation. So,
Ricardo, what about B corporations?
So actually, B Corporation is a certification. So it's not actually a legal entity. There is a entity called the Benefit Corporation at the California state level. So just to distinguish those two. So a benefit corporation basically is a conventional business that is maximizing shareholder return, but that you can cut into some of that shareholder return by providing some community benefit. So it basically created some protection from shareholders suing the board of directors when the board of directors wanted to use some profits towards charitable purposes. So we typically don't see a lot of cooperatives form as benefit corporations because most of the time they're not looking to recreate a conventional business doing a little sprinkling of their profits to some social good. What they really want to do is structure their business in a way that is fundamentally reshaping the way that money flows through our society. So that's but there is a benefit corporation. And then the B Corporation, B Corp certification is basically a list of criteria that this organization will evaluate your business against. And if you fulfill all their criteria, then you can get certified B Corp. And it's basically a good marketing tool to let the public know that you've met the criteria of a B Corp. But it's not a corporation in itself. It's just a certification by an organization based in San Francisco.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yeah, if you have a LLC that you form out of state, let's say you go to Las Vegas or Delaware to form an LLC. In order to operate business in California, you would still have to pay the corporate tax the corporate fee, right, of $800.
Yeah, if you want the privilege of doing business in California, you have to pay the minimum franchise tax. And in fact, if you are a legal entity formed in Delaware or outside of California, and that entity is doing business in California, there's actually a foreign corporation or foreign business fee that you also have to pay, which I think is about $150 or $200 per year. So you actually get hit with another tax on top of that $800 minimum franchise tax.
Wow.
Yeah,
Ouch.
yeah. So for a lot of folks, it doesn't make a lot of sense to, form a Delaware corporation or something like that when they're a small community-based business.
Speaking on LLC, Ricardo, if you were to develop an LLC and you don't use it and it's dormant, let's say for 4 or 5 years, you're still on the hook for that $800 per year, right?
You are, but I've seen people just stop doing business and stop paying. John Logan or wife. What was it? They stop doing business and basically their business goes defunct. I don't know exactly if you're still on the hook for that $800. You're only on hook for that $800 if you're actually doing business. But what ends up happening is, I believe, and I could be wrong, but what I believe happens is if you stop doing business after a period of time, you don't pay that $800 fee, you might have to reincorporate after so many years of inactivity. So.
But didn't you say you could also? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Would they want that money, that $800, for the time that you were listed? So if you never used it at all, you just put it together, but then whatever happened, the folks that you were gathering together, everything kind of fell through, and a couple of years went by. Would they still want $1,600 in order to revive it?
I think it depends on whether or not if you were doing any business at all during those 2 years. So if you were not doing any business over those 2 years, I think there's an argument that you would be able to not have to pay that $1,600, but there'd be I believe you'd have to prove it some way, but I'm not sure, and I can check with my my colleagues or after this to see what the case is in that situation.
Couldn't you just restructure and just have liability insurance, which would, again, cover the legal aspects of liability, but still not have the corporate LLC structure? So you wouldn't have to pay the $800 annual fee if that was the case, or is that not correct?
No, that's if you never formed the business, or if you formed an entity and then stopped using it years ago, you could just start doing business. You'd have to get a new doing business as DBA from the city that you're in, and file with them. But you could just start operating. Yeah, you can just do a partnership and get that general liability insurance to protect yourself. Yeah.
Now, Ricardo, I know you didn't cover nonprofit on this particular go through. Is there a huge difference between what we've been talking about and with the nonprofit?
So there is a difference. I'll quickly go into why you would choose one over the other. And there's what was it? A nonprofit is a corporation in California. So all those corporate formalities and things I was talking about, all of that stuff applies.
Right.
But really the 4 main factors that we see on whether you should choose a for-profit, so a cooperative corporation or an LLC or general stock corporation, or nonprofit corporation, are these four factors: purpose, control, funding, and profits. So I can go over this maybe real quickly. So purpose, the question is, who do you primarily hope to benefit? And can you articulate an exempt purpose? So if you are looking to serve low-income communities, marginalized communities, communities of color, who fit some charitable class definition, then that's one factor to consider. That and whether or not you can claim an exempt purpose. So who's going to benefit from the functioning of this organization that you're going to start? Another is control. So in a cooperative, it's controlled by, like that, it's controlled by the members themselves. Whereas in a nonprofit, you have to have a board of directors that is majority disinterested parties. So people who are not interested, who are not directly benefiting from the activities of the organization.
Mhm.
So third is funding. So how do you want to be able to capitalize this business? Do you want to create a business that starts, at the beginning, you might have to get some investments, but that at some point you're going to be generating enough revenue to make it self-sustainable, where you're using loans to expand and buy new assets and things, and or are you primarily thinking that the way you're going to get money is through donations, through foundations, through grants, those types of things? And then I'm going to skip over this nonprofit, the business activities. And then the final consideration is profits. What do you want to be able to do with the money left over at the end of the year? In a nonprofit, any money left over in the nonprofit at the end of the year has to be reinvested into that charitable purpose. It can't go to the staff of the organization as like a bonus or something. Whereas in a cooperative, the profits or the surplus is distributed based off of how much value they've contributed. So if the purpose of this organization is to benefit the members and to build community wealth through their participation in the cooperative, then the nonprofit might not be the best fit for that type of organization. Let's see. Yeah, so the bottom line is a for-profit business benefits its owners, and a nonprofit organization is one that's dedicated to serving the community at large. So that's really what we see as those considerations are the biggest reasons to figure out, should you form a nonprofit, should you form a cooperative? Now, all that being said, what we have typically seen is some organizations will actually create both. They'll create a nonprofit organization that's able to access grant funding. They get donations, tax deductible donations, and they use that money to help incubate a cooperative. And so they can use that money to do training and education for the cooperative members themselves. They can use that money to start doing outreach to community members to get them interested in the business. And the nonprofit and cooperative are sort of working together hand in hand, but they're allowed to do different things. At some point, the cooperative becomes its own totally separate organization that doesn't rely on the support of the nonprofit. So, so you don't have to necessarily just choose one or the other, but if you're only going to start one business or one enterprise, you have to ask those 4 questions of yourself and come to a decision.
So you could do both. So as a nonprofit, so let's say a Village Connect wants to form a cooperative, will we just add on an LLC, or will we just operate under our nonprofit status?
Sorry, Greg scared me. Sorry, say that question again.
So I was just giving a hypothetical. If Village Connect wanted to form a cooperative, will we just do it under our 501c3, or will we form an LLC in addition to our 501c3?
Well, you could do it in stages, where at the beginning you're kind of convening people, seeing who's interested, seeing what type of business the community wants, acting as that convener, getting people into the room, seeing if anybody's interested in becoming founders of this cooperative, and then take it from there and sort of take it step by step. So you wouldn't necessarily have to form an LLC right off the bat, but you could be that convener. And when it comes to a point where people are ready to jump into the business, then you can form the LLC at that point. And it can be, whether it's an LLC or a cooperative corporation, you can figure out a way to tie the nonprofit to that business. Maybe it's having a board seat for the corporation is designated for somebody who's representing Village Connect. so that you're in those decisions and making sure that you're providing the necessary support that the cooperative needs during its incubation phase. So that's one way, but there's a lot of different models out there.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate you covering that piece.
Yeah.
I know that wasn't a part of the original plan, but
Yeah.
That's a big piece.
No problem. Happy to do it.
And so, Ricardo, if I could just ask you personally, what made you interested in the cooperative model? And do you have a personal stake?
Yeah, my introduction actually was I was living in rural Zambia near Lake Tanganyika for about 2.5 years and doing Peace Corps. And when I arrived in my village and was being introduced at a village meeting to everyone, I said, I'm supposed to be here doing teacher training and teacher education, but I don't want to be doing something that the community doesn't want me to be doing. I want to be supporting what you're doing, what you want me to be supporting. So what can I do? And a group of women stood up and said, we want to start a women's cooperative. And I said, sure, I'll help do that. And over the next 2.5 years, I worked with 2 groups of women from different villages one that I lived in and the village next door. And they actually showed me and taught me about cooperative economics and the power of cooperatives over 2.5 years. And so that was my introduction into the transformative powers of cooperative economics. When I came back to the States, I was working down in South LA from Long Beach. I'm working in South LA doing eviction prevention and homeless rehousing. And a nonprofit I worked at had a workforce development program. And I would see all these people come in, they'd get trained, and they get put into jobs, and they'd still be out on the streets, not able to afford a place to live. So I was looking for a model that could really provide a foundation for every worker to be able to gain the fruits of their labor, and started a worker cooperative study group in LA. And through that study group, found Sustainable Economies Law Center and came up here to work with them. So that's sort of my trajectory in this, and my personal stake is dreaming of a world where everybody can participate fruitfully and show up as their full selves, and to be creating institutions that recognize us as whole humans as opposed to cogs in a machine. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with it.
Wow. Awesome. As a matter of fact, I'd like to use your comments as a segue towards us closing. And I'd like to look at the remaining folks who are online. Looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 folks still online. I'd like to just pose a question to everybody that's online, and this is consistent with the whole aspect of, I'd like to say, cooperative mindset, and developing that further. Is what would be your vision in 5 years? If you could just share briefly that this cooperative movement has taken hold. What would be your vision? What would you like to see in 5 years?
It's an interesting question. Personally, I'd like to see an opportunity for communities to be able to become self-supporting, and also to be able to educate future possible participants to have them knowledgeable about the entities and the models that are available to establish cooperatives, and that we can become self-sufficient in regards to particular communities of color.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see more entrepreneurship opportunities turn into cooperative businesses, especially within the minority communities or urban communities where I feel like Ricardo was talking about, making it more equitable for some of these workers who are part of these workforce programs after they finish certain programs, especially when it comes to development. Once those projects are finished, they have no work. So where are they going? They're back on the streets and they're doing the same things, trying to survive. So if we can educate these wannabe entrepreneurs on this particular model, and we see more of it, then we can invest in other industries like health insurance, for example, health insurance cooperatives, all kinds of cooperatives that are going to really benefit the community. I feel is what's needed, but we've got to get this information out. That's why I think this project is so important, because without them getting the information, they're just going to do business as usual.
Thank you, Wanda.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Greg.
I'd like to witness like a burgeoning sense of autonomy and ability to influence development in a neighborhood. I'd like for like people in my community, specifically East Oakland, to feel like if they have an idea, they're able to link up with others and get that idea like manifested into reality, as opposed to kind of what I sense now where people aren't even sure that an idea can happen. And if so, there's a sense that you have to like get an angel investor and like have all of these things that aren't necessary to create businesses for our community.
Thank you.
I'd like to see more pathways to education around this type of thing. Maybe in the school system, maybe somehow supplementing regular schooling, similar to the things that we do with the boys, you know, maybe on the high school level, to really establish and foment like I guess like a cultural standard of cooperation that leads to people even having that idea. Besides just having these structures in place, I'm not sure that a lot of our people are even culturally inclined to do something like that. I think a lot of people are more interested in just kind of getting in under somebody else instead of taking responsibility and collective ownership, as well as like that initiative to enhance themselves and their communities. So I'd like to see that.
Thank you, Koja.
Just to kind of back up what Cordial said, just kind of changing the culture of how we do business, and seeing more of people of color, like the Black and Brown community, like supporting one another, and also more longevity, because typically when there's a sole proprietorship, it's just ran by one individual, and sometimes it gets a little tough. So when there is a co-op, I think things will kind of, you know, when one person gets tired, the other can take over. So just kind of changing the culture of how we do business for more of a longevity and, you know, like longer lasting businesses and opportunities for everyone.
Yes, Tiara, and just to also add on to what you were talking about, many people in the community, like yourself, like to go into businesses around, for example, hair. So how can I form a cooperative model around a hair business, whether it be beauty supplies or whatever? How does that happen? And without the education to do that, we get kind of lost. But again, Quajo made a very great point in that if there is not a movement in culture towards this model, it becomes very difficult for our people to get involved. So how do we create a cultural movement into this direction. I think it's here because basically we don't have a choice. We're beginning to have a choice. So there's got to be some sort of shift in that direction.
Thank you. For me, I just say, you know, I've read often about the institutions that a people must be able to garner control over them in order to be self-sustaining. And so, you know, my vision would be that we do have banks, that we have our own hospitals, that we have our own schools, that we have our own grocery stores, and we also have access to land to be able to farm and develop our own foods. Outside of that, I just believe that we're going to be perpetually caught up in this whole aspect of dependency, which kind of got us where we're at right now. And lastly, I'll just say I just would love to see, and I'm going to future speak it, that we have thrown a wrench in gentrification, and that we're not going to be herded like sheep into different parts of the world and geographies that we well know are not going to have the type of resources to sustain us. And that's just my viewpoint. So anyone else, any closing comments?
I want to say I appreciate the effort, and also want to thank, you know, Ricardo and Greg, Galen, Wanda, everybody for, you know, putting forth the effort to get the information out. And with that, you know, again, it's just a simple thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Nunez. Will the slides that he presented be available somewhere posted after this video chat?
Yeah, I'll share the slides, and you'll be able to access them and have all the notes and that are under the slides. And some of them have links, and then we can also share our Think Outside the Box manual, and then a link to Co-op Law so that you can do some more digging yourself if you're interested in that.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll also add another one, that this has been recorded. And so I will be developing this into a YouTube video that I'll share with everybody.
I also would like to thank Ricardo and Greg for the information. I was looking into the LLC, but there's just a lot more information that I learned tonight that will help me on my decision as far as where I want to take my business. So I just want to say thank you for your time and all the information you offered us tonight.
You're welcome. And we also do a legal cafe where you can come in and talk to an attorney about your specific issues. We do them 3 times per month in the East Bay. And
online.
And we started doing them about once a month or once every other month, virtually online. So you can, so if you can't make the trip to Berkeley or Oakland, Richmond, where we typically do them, then you can participate online and check that out on our website on our events page. So, yeah. And just to respond to the 5-year vision, I think what I would love to see is that that in 5 years there becomes a foothold in East Oakland, San Leandro, and that whole industrial corridor where communities have there's a foothold of cooperatives and self-determination as part of that, so that people can retain the money instead of it flowing out of our communities to these companies that don't care about us. So I'd really love to see some of that and be able to support that in any way I can.
Excellent, excellent. Greg, as always, thank you for the invitation to partner. And all of us at Village Connect are very excited about working with you guys and being a part of this movement, because that's the way we see it. We see it, this is a movement, and we're just really happy to be in alignment with it and be a part of it. Ricardo, excellent presentation. Thank you for the information. And I'm really happy that when you went to that village, you posed that question, and it sounded like it was really transformational for you to ask the question and to be able to get the response you got.
No, thank you. Yeah, it was. I'll always be grateful for those women for standing up and showing me the way.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the next happening is Think Outside the Box on November 30th at Village Connect between hours of 9 and 3 p.m. And so we will be putting out our marketing and promotion and getting folks out to the village on that date. And then also on December 3rd, we will be having our next Mastermind session with Vanessa, and we'll be covering governance on that particular session. All right, so hopefully you guys will join us, and everybody on the call, please share with your friends and family that it's happening and that the movement is moving, and we definitely like everybody's full participation. But in the meantime, I'm gonna call it a night, and thank you everybody for your time and your participation, and let's keep pushing, y'all.
All right, thank you.
All right, good night.
Peace, y'all.
Right.